Clayton's only ranch road was chained shut by an HOA miles away, all because Roger Langley called it a dust hazard. A smug board used fake environmental rules to choke off his livelihood without ever stepping on his land. But Clayton had a county deed, a court connection, and one explosive expert report that flipped the whole case. And just wait until you see who ended up paving the road they tried to erase. Justice came down fast and hard. Clayton Brooks had driven the same half-mile strip of dirt road every morning since the late 80s. It wound from the county highway, past his eastern pasture along the feed silos, and ended at the barn where his family raised longhorn cattle and baled hay through blistering Texas summers. The road wasn't scenic, and it sure wasn't fancy, but it was his. Deeded, maintained, and honored by the county as a legal access easement. The county knew it. His neighbors knew it. Even the old survey markers, worn down by decades of boots and tires, still quietly held the line. He never imagined it would become the center of a battle. The trouble started with Roger Langley, a tech executive turned self-appointed environmental crusader who'd recently bought a luxury country retreat in a subdivision nearly 2 miles from Clayton's ranch. Roger didn't live in the area full-time. His property barely brushed the county line, but that didn't stop him from running for president of the local HOA, a role no one else wanted, until he swept in with glossy flyers and promises to revitalize natural balance and environmental standards. His house. Nobody paid much attention when Roger passed some new landscaping regulations and banned ATV noise after 6 p.m. But then came Ordinance 14C. It sounded harmless at first, a vague mandate about reducing airborne particulates from external unpaved ingress routes adjoining HOA-managed areas. What it actually meant: if your dirt road kicked up dust anywhere near an HOA-controlled property, even if you didn't belong to the HOA, they could attempt to regulate it. Clayton first heard about the ordinance on a Friday. By Monday morning, he was living in its crosshairs. He opened the gate that morning expecting the usual diesel hum of feed trucks, distant lowing from the cattle pens, the clean bite of sunrise on dry grass. Instead, he was met with something that stopped him cold. Bright orange construction cones had been set across the center of the ranch road. A metal chain stretched between 2 temporary poles driven into the gravel, and zip-tied right to his own barbed wire fence was a plastic placard reading, HOA Environmental Closure, Dust Violation, Road Access Suspended per Ordinance 14C. For a full minute, Clayton just stared at it. He blinked twice, then looked again, thinking it had to be a prank. It wasn't. A diesel truck idled 30 feet away. In the front seat, Roger Langley sat comfortably behind tinted glass, filming with his phone. When Clayton's hay delivery driver arrived and asked what was going on, Roger rolled down the window just enough to speak without stepping out. "This man's road," he said, gesturing lazily with a paper copy of the ordinance, "is non-compliant. Until he can prove pavement or rerouting, it's to remain sealed." Clayton didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just stood there, watching his cattle bunch up along the fence line, waiting for feed. His ranch hands had parked up by the highway, unsure if they could even walk in. And the hay shipment, still on the truck, ticking away money by the hour. 30 years of quiet work, good neighborliness, and legal right-of-way, wiped out overnight with one smug decision and a cheap plastic sign. And that's when the silence started to burn. Clayton Brooks wasn't quick to anger. He'd run into burning houses, pulled drivers out of flipped pickups, and calmed panicked bulls loose on the road, never once raising his voice unless someone's life was on the line. But this wasn't just disrespect. This was theft in broad daylight, of time, money, and dignity. By the time he parked outside the community clubhouse where the monthly HOA meeting was held, he already knew it wasn't going to be a conversation. It would be a reckoning. He walked in wearing dusty jeans and a faded button-up. No suit, no folder. Just the original county easement map rolled up under his arm, its creases yellowed from age, but legally sound. As soon as he stepped through the door, every eye in the room landed on him like he was the problem. Roger Langley sat center table, flanked by board members sipping coffee and scrolling tablets. The man didn't even bother to stand. Clayton didn't waste time. "You don't have jurisdiction over my land, and that road's been there longer than half this town. You had no right to block it." Roger blinked, then smiled the way only men in positions of borrowed power do. "Mr. Brooks, we're not targeting you personally. This is a matter of public health. Your road produces visible airborne particulates, dust pollution, in plain terms. We're simply enforcing HOA standards that now extend to neighboring impact zones." "Impact zones?" Clayton echoed, trying to keep his voice level. "That road is half a mile from your subdivision. It doesn't touch a single HOA-managed lot." Roger nodded calmly. "Dust drifts, Mr. Brooks. We've received complaints." One of the board members, a woman in designer boots who'd moved from San Diego 6 months ago, chimed in. "We've had respiratory issues logged near the county line. My son has mild seasonal asthma, and this kind of exposure isn't safe." Another added, "It's not personal, sir, but we live here for the natural beauty, and frankly, unpaved ranch roads just aren't compatible with that image." Clayton laid the easement map flat on the table. "This road is legally recorded and recognized by the county. You're not just ignoring the law, you're cutting off access to private property." Roger didn't even glance at the document. Old agreements can be challenged, and we have an environmental attorney on retainer now. If you want to contest it, I suggest you get your own. The message was clear. They didn't care about his legal rights. They didn't care about the land. What they cared about was optics, keeping their curated country escape free of anything that reminded them real people still worked the soil. Clayton left the meeting without another word. He knew there'd be no reasoning with people who saw a family ranch as an aesthetic problem. But the next blow hit harder. That weekend, while he was in town picking up fencing supplies, a neighbor called to say a sheriff's cruiser was parked at the road's mouth. Clayton raced home and found a deputy standing by, while HOA workers dug into the gravel, cementing steel fence posts into the ground. The cones were gone, replaced with locked chains and a laminated copy of the same ordinance, now framed in plexiglass. The deputy said he was only there to prevent escalation. Clayton could almost laugh at the irony. For the next week, his ranch hands parked on the highway shoulder and hiked in through the north tree line. His hay delivery had to be canceled. Several calves went without proper feed, and one shipment contract fell through entirely. By the end of the week, Clayton had lost just over $3,000, and whatever patience he had left. But what stung more wasn't the money. It was the knowledge that they were trying to erase everything he'd built, one regulation at a time. Clayton Brooks had spent his whole life putting out fires, literal and otherwise. But this time he let one burn. Not out of recklessness, but purpose. He'd been humiliated, blocked from his own land, and treated like a trespasser on a road he'd maintained longer than the HOA had existed. But instead of exploding, he went quiet, focused, pulled out his legal file cabinet in the old tack room and started lining up every document, photo, and signature like dominoes ready to fall. The first move was procedural, a temporary restraining order against the HOA for interfering with access to essential services. The second came with heart. He spent 3 evenings visiting his neighbors one by one, collecting sworn affidavits from local ranchers, delivery drivers, and even a retired postal worker, who all confirmed they'd used the same access road for decades. Some had dated photos. One had dashcam footage. All of it built a wall of testimony. Then he unrolled the ace, in an old deed envelope tucked between weathered plat maps. He found what he was looking for, a utility easement designation signed by the county commissioner in 1992. Not just an access agreement, an official classification, meaning the road was legally protected as a service route. That changed everything. Still, he didn't stop there. He called his cousin Miranda, a soft-spoken court clerk in the regional circuit who knew her way around filings like a surgeon knew arteries. Within a day, she flagged the ordinance as potentially overreaching. Then came the call to Eddie Morales, an old firefighting buddy who now sat on the county planning commission. Eddie didn't say much at first, just grunted and asked for copies, but by morning he'd emailed back with one line, "Yeah, they're cooked." In 10 days flat, Clayton filed a civil injunction, a request for emergency access restoration, and a formal motion for compensatory damages due to economic losses caused by the closure. HOA lawyers tried to stall. They leaned on vague language in Ordinance 14C, arguing they had the right to limit particulate output from neighboring ingress sources. But what they didn't expect was what came next. During the evidentiary review, Clayton's attorney submitted an independent environmental consultant's report, paid out of pocket by Clayton himself. The findings were crystal clear. Roger Langley's subdivision featured unsealed decorative sand trails, community volleyball pits, and loose gravel garden paths that generated 3 times more dust under moderate wind than the packed ranch road ever did. In other words, the HOA's own landscaping violated their ordinance. And Roger, his backyard Zen garden was the worst offender. The courtroom, small and quiet under fluorescent lights, shifted. The judge didn't say a word at first, but her brow tightened, her fingers tapped. Then she leaned forward and said evenly, "This court orders the immediate suspension of the blockade and schedules a compliance hearing within 14 days. Until then, Mr. Brooks's property rights are to be fully respected. This board will be held to the same environmental standards it seeks to enforce." Clayton didn't smile. He just nodded once, like a man who had never expected mercy, only the law, and now the law was on his side. The judgment didn't take long. The court ruled decisively. The HOA had no authority to interfere with the deeded, county-registered easement. Their attempt to regulate the road under Ordinance 14C was declared an abuse of power and a violation of Texas Civil Code protecting property access. But the real justice came in the final clause. Not only was the HOA ordered to remove all barriers immediately, they were also required to pave the entire half-mile stretch of Clayton's Road with county-standard asphalt at their own expense. If they failed to comply within 90 days, they'd face escalating fines starting at $5,000 per week, plus potential civil liability for lost ranch revenue. The courtroom didn't erupt. There was no dramatic gasp or applause, just the sound of pen scribbling and a single bang of the gavel that ended it all. Roger Langley was notably absent, but his resignation letter arrived that same week, sent by email and read into the public record. No apology, no explanation, just a bland paragraph stating personal reasons. The rest of the HOA board didn't speak a word in his defense. In the following meeting, Ordinance 14C was quietly repealed, struck from the record with a unanimous vote, and tucked away like it had never existed. Clayton didn't ask for thanks. He didn't expect anyone from the board to show up or shake his hand. That wasn't why he fought. 3 months later, the last paving crew rolled off the site, leaving behind a clean stretch of blacktop that cut cleanly through the ranch dust. County inspectors signed off on the work. A modest metal sign was bolted into a cedar post at the road's entrance. It read, "Private Road, Easement Protected by County Deed." That morning, Clayton stood by the new gate, thermos in hand, as the first hay truck in months rolled smoothly down the asphalt. His old shepherd, Buck, lay nearby in the sun, tail flicking contentedly. There was no cloud of dust behind the tires, no obstacles, no cones, no cameras, just the long, open stretch of road, exactly where it always belonged.